Vintage port is one of the most collectible, one of the most age-worthy wines in the world, hailing from the Douro in Portugal near the city of Porto, where it gets its namesake. While vintage port isn't really expensive, it's not cheap, it's only made in great vintages. Luckily, there are some affordable alternatives out there like we're gonna taste through here today. Port is broken into tawny ports and ruby ports. Vintage port falls under the ruby ports or red ports. What happens with these port wines, how you make them, is you crush the grapes, and as they start fermenting, and at a certain point you add a flavorless clear grape brandy. It's high in alcohol, so it kills the yeast, it stops the fermentation, therefore there's a lot of sugar left in the wine, and the alcohol is a bit higher than a normal table wine. That residual sugar, the tannins, and the wonderful juicy acidity that port wine has allows it to evolve in the bottle with time. Vintage ports need to be aged in the barrel for 2 years. They're then bottled, and then the aging is passed on to you. However, you have this other category which I love called LBV ports, or late bottle vintage. They usually have a vintage date on them like vintage ports do. However, they can be made every year. They don't have to be made just in exceptional years. These ports are held in the barrel for 4 to 6 years, so they mature a little bit faster. They're easier to drink upon release. Sometimes producers don't even filter them. They'll say LBV unfiltered. These wines can age like vintage ports, and they come in at a fraction of the price. Even though vintage port are some of the most expensive ports aside from 30, 40-year-old or Quinta tawnies, it's actually the easiest port to make because there's not a lot of blending involved. You just pick the best grapes possible, you crush them, you start fermenting it, you get the grape spirits, you put them in the barrel for 2 years, and boom, you bottle them. I say easiest because it's easy to say, but when you're in the cellar, it's a lot of work. Ruby ports are blends made of Portuguese red grapes like Touriga Nacional, Touriga Franca, Tinta Roriz, Tinta Francisca, Tinta Barroca, Tinta Chao. There's just a slew of varieties permitted in the Douro, which to me is the most beautiful wine region in the world, not only for the extreme slopes, but for the vastness of it. It's just ginormous. It goes on and on and on. It's really one of those special places in the world, and there's a reason why it's a UNESCO World Heritage Site. The Douro is one of the oldest demarcated wine regions in the world. The British were really fond of these wines because when you fortified them, they survived the sea voyage over to England. Plus, with the residual sugar, they were just delicious to drink. These wines have kind of fallen out of fashion because usually you need several people to drink through a bottle unless you're a hardcore port geek. However, port has seen a renaissance domestically because tourism to Portugal has increased drastically in recent years. Of all wines that are supposed to age well, fortified wines, sweet wines really age the best. That's why if you do want to buy a special bottle at somebody's birth or for a graduation present, vintage port is really the way to go. Or maybe an LBV. Let's see here today as we compare. Okay, let's get tasting. We're going to do something a little bit different. I have all these LBVs and a wild card in here, but we're first going to taste a vintage port because when you taste a complex wine first, all the other wines can kind of pale in comparison unless some of these LBVs are exceptional. I have the Quinto Vallado Vintage Port 2019. This comes in at 99 bucks, 19.5% of alcohol. Quinta do Vallado is one of the great producers of vintage port. They have their table wines for me can be a little bit too big, a little too concentrated, but I think that concentrated style carries over to their vintage ports. I have not had the 2019, although I have experience with theirs. I have experience with their wines. 2019 was a great vintage in the Douro. Let's taste it. I have a hot take here. When it comes to vintage ports, I actually prefer to drink them young. In the past, they were made with not so high quality grape spirits. They weren't great with tannin management. That's why you needed a lot of bottle age to soften them. These days, in addition to global warming, where the grapes get riper, the tannins get riper, plus winemaking techniques both in the cellar and in the vineyard, and higher quality grape spirits, the wines are really drinkable, really enjoyable young. They say that they're enjoyable right out of the gate. Then they go through a dumb phase. Then they become more enjoyable with more decades on them. Vintage port is just one of those things where I've had some really old ones, and I really just can't tell how old they are. Are they from the 40s, 50s, 60s, 80s? I have no idea once they start aging. Let's give this a go. Dark, inky color, as vintage port often is. Oh, I get some nice leather notes. dark cherry. The alcohol does not come out too hot on this. That's what port, sometimes you can feel the alcohol. It's almost like Puff the Magic Dragon. You can take a match and go and start a fire. That's a joke. Dark cherry, dark plum, leather, a peppery note. These wines are really this smells awesome. Sometimes with vintage ports, I get this tangerine peel-like flavor that I get in Syrah and sometimes Sangiovese. I don't pick it up here, but it smells good. Let's give it a taste. This is something. Raisiny flavor, some grapey flavor, along with a leather, cigar box, spice, incredibly complex. What I love about Quinta do Vallado is because of that concentration of fruit, the alcohol really doesn't pop off to me. This is something, man. I might even have a sip of this. That's going to be hard to, I mean, as far as young vintage port is, I'm 96 points on this. I think it's that darn good. Let's see how the rest compare here. Man, that's good. Ooh. I am still tasting that wine, my goodness. Let me change glasses. Anyways, by the way, I'm tasting out these Schwarzweißel glasses. I like these glasses because they're like a Bordeaux shape. They're a universal shape, but they're small. You don't have to worry about breaking them. And I like the weight of them, the balance, the feel. I have a link in the description box if you want to check them out. Let's start out with wine number 1. As always, I knew what these wines were. I just Corvined them and had somebody mix them up for me. That is a tough act to follow. Let's start out with wine 1. Wine 1 definitely doesn't feel as rich, while the vintage port felt like black dark cherry. This is just like plain cherry. There's a little tomato leaf. There's a little development here. I have LBVs from all different vintages because that was what's on the market. A little bit of leather. I like there's just a slight tomato leaf here. And here's the thing. A lot of vintage ports are similar. It's just going to feel it in the concentration on the palate. Like this definitely doesn't smell as concentrated and as ripe as the vintage port. While it doesn't have the massive fruit up front, it has that little tangerine peel-ness that I really like about it. Tannins are svelte. The alcohol isn't as high. I gotta say, that's a heck of a start. These are so delicious. I just want to drink them. I just really want to drink them. Let's go to wine 2. 2 has more of a grape flavor, not a cherry flavor. Almost like those red table grapes. It's got a little bit of a flower component. A little bit of cigar box. Again, here's the thing. With these rich fortified ports, they have similar flavors. It's just you feel vintage port has more concentration. It's almost like if you've had ice cream, like a cheap supermarket ice cream versus maybe a more artisanal ice cream, maybe a chocolate one, you feel the richness of the more artisanal ice cream. This almost smells, now I'm getting some sour cherry flavors. Almost Sangiovese-esque, which I like. These are all really good wines. Number 2, like number 1 and 2, so like if the vintage port was something like heavy cream, these next 2 would almost be like 2% or whole milk maybe. You can feel that they're less concentrated, but I really like about these first 2 so far, you don't feel the alcohol burn. This is kind of a more elegant port, so to speak. This is something I think that you could drink a lot of. Let's move on to number 3. That was good. Number 3. Oh, 3 also has development. I know I have a couple vintage ports with some years on them. This has cigar box, earth, some dark cherry, but the tobacco takes over. This smells the most aged out of all of them, but not too much. You still have plenty of fruit flavors. Again, these are subtle notes. This has a spike of flavor. I really like it. This is like whatever 3 is. It's in a great drinking window right now. Wine number 4. I like doing this blind tasting a little bit different this time. I had a reference point since wine is a comparison game and then tasting against these other ones. And I know I could have done it where I threw it in blind too, but I just wanted to try something different. Number 4 is a little bit more twiggy. Has some of those stemmy notes you get some with some wild grapes like Zinfandel. I get more bosenberry, more blackberry flavors. Oh, this is complex, man. This is like, this one's distinctively, 3 was distinctively different because it was developed, and 4 just tastes different with the twigginess. What all of these port wines share is this little spike of intensity you get in the mid palate. Not when you first put the wine in the mouth, but as it travels along the palate down the finish, you get this beautiful spike of intensity. These are really good wines so far. Let's move on to number 5. I have yet to find one that has the concentration of that vintage port. Let's go on to number 5. Oh, this could be close. This is dark. This is inky. The thing is, when I do go to big events where you're tasting a lot of vintage port, you should see everybody's teeth afterwards. It's all black. Your gums are receding because all the high alcohol, the tannins really get to your gums, your teeth. Like, it really gonna brush your teeth a lot. A week after port tasting, man, it's tough. Dark, rich. This is vintage port-esque, I'm telling you. On the nose, it was as concentrated as vintage port. On the palate, it wasn't as much. You still get the dark cherry flavors. You still get the leather notes. Again, more along 2%. Not all the way up to heavy cream, but still good. Let's move on to number 6. 6. Tomato. Tobacco, dark cherry, some strawberry notes. However, I have to search more in number 6. I have to look. It's not expressing itself enough. I have to look really hard to find the flavors here. Not to say that it's a bad thing. It's just, it could be a shy phase, or obviously I'm tasting a bunch of great wines here. Let's give it a go. Here's the thing about all the wines. Regardless of the subtle flavors, again, you have that spike of intensity on the back end. Very nice. I don't think I have anything that matches up to the high level of the vintage port, but I have some very good wines. You ready for the reveal? If you want to hang out with me and other wine geeks, check out channel memberships. I have several tiers, but in the Grand Reserve tier, I do a monthly live hangout call where you can come up on screen. We can just talk shop, share our wines. We have a lot of fun. I'm going to add a 3rd tier soon, and there are perks for the other tiers as well. And if you do join, it supports the work I do here, so thank you so much. Okay, I don't have an LBV that's on the level of this Quinta de Vallado, but I have some very nice wines. Like, again, this was a tough task. I had this at 96 points. I thought it was just so rich and concentrated and excellent. Let's give this a go here. And here's the thing about port wine. Yes, there is sweetness, but there is acidity, and the alcohol really kind of balances it out. It doesn't feel overcoyingly sweet. Okay, let's go to number 4. Twig, blackberry flavors. It was the twiggiest, the stemminess. Remember I said it kind of reminds me of some things like Zinfandel, St. Laurent. I sometimes get those flavors. Carignan, and sometimes even Pinot Noir, actually. 90 plus points. Twiggy, twiggy, twiggy. Let's see. 90 plus points. This is the Niepoort LBV 2019, same vintage. This comes in at $25. Dirk Niepoort, who I've drank with several times, tasted with several times, is the owner. He's kind of like a marketing genius. Niepoort has a humongous portfolio. One of the OG shippers of Porto. Also make fantastic table wines. This LBV, I think the last one I had was the 16. I don't remember it being twiggy. At $25 though, if you like your ports to have some other savory type notes like I was talking about here, this is the one for you. $25. I do think, again, LBVs are a steal. Is this unfiltered? This is unfiltered, so this is built to age as well. I'm actually a huge fan of their table wines, especially things like Redema, Robustus, and there's a slew of other ones. They're actually pretty low in alcohol for Douro wines, since Derek is a hardcore Burgundy fan. He likes to make his dry wines in that style. Okay, let's move on. I have 2 tied for 91 points. Number 6, first of all, the last one. I said it was shy, remember, on the nose. Similar flavors to a lot of them, but it did have the rich finish that I love in a lot of these. 91 points. I thought it was very good. Let's take a look and see. Let's take a look and see. 91 points. This is one of the wild cards because it's not an LBV at all. This is just a finest reserve non-vintage, just a ruby port. This is the Quinta do Vale Meandro finest reserve Porto. This comes in at $19. Again, if you want to get in on the style, The cool thing about all these wines here, they're fairly readily available if you go to a fine wine shop. LBVs, usually there's decent selection if you can find a good wine merchant. Quinta do Vale Meão is responsible for making maybe my favorite table wine from the Douro, their flagship, the Vale Meão, one of the great families of the Douro. Of the current owners, I think it was the grandfather or grandmother that they had their hands in selling grapes and helping make Barcavelha, one of Portugal's greatest wines. It's like the Vega Sicilia of Portugal. That was the wild card, and it showed well. I just threw that in because the rest are LBVs, so look at that. It showed super well. I was at the estate several times. Beautiful up in the Douro Superior. They're just making some excellent wines. Let's go on to number 2. Number 2 was the most elegant out of them. If you don't like that huge, big, rich style, well, if you don't like that style, I don't know why you're drinking vintage port. But to me, remember, I felt like it had sour cherry. It was like Sangiovese-esque. I love the elegance. 91 points. Let's take a look here. This is the Quinta de Crasto LBV, late model vintage 2015, unfiltered. Again, made to age. This comes in at $25. 2015 is I think that's the release you'll see on the market. To find a vintage port with some development, an LBV, sorry, not vintage, with some development, $24. Again, man, these are incredible values to get this kind of complexity at $25, especially for a fortified wine, a wine that you have after dinner, or you smoke a little cigar. I mean, I love to smoke cigars, although I don't smoke them so often because it hurts my throat, but that was delicious. Okay, the top 3 left were super serious. Like, everything was serious, but these were super serious wines. Let's go with number 5. It was dark, concentrated. Remember, at first I said, oh, this is the one that might have the concentration to equal the vintage port. But just a little short. I mean, again, I gave the vintage port 96. I gave this 92 points. 92 points. Make sure that it's concentrated. It's the same producers. This is the Quinta do Vallado LBV 2018. This comes in at $24. Same level of alcohol, 19.5. Last time I was at Quinta do Vallado, I actually stayed at their guest house. It was in the Douro. Spectacular room overlooking the river. I mean, it was 5-star level quality. Great dinners. Again, I feel like I like their port wines more than their table wines. And $24, again, that's why LBVs offer ridiculous value for money. That has the concentration to age. This is a lesson for me. I always talk about and scream how I love LBVs so much, and you find similar quality. But it's been a long time since I sat down and compared like a vintage to a bunch of LBVs. And you see that my vintage ports, they're made from better grapes. It's a little more expensive. You see why the quality is a little bit higher. Okay, number 3, I thought was the most developed. That's just what stood out. 92 plus points, which I got excited about. And I don't know what the price is, but man, you get in on this, you get this kind of development at a good price. That's something special. 92 plus points. This is the Warre's late bottle vintage, bottle aged Porto, unfiltered, 2010. This comes in at $35. Delicious wine. Unfiltered, can still age more. Again, you're getting a wine that's 15 years old. That's still really good. $35. That is exceptional. Exceptional quality. Warre's is one of the classic shippers from the Douro. Their vintage ports are pretty concentrated. I love this stuff. That was really good. Really good. The winner amongst the LVVs, number 1, the first one I tasted, not as concentrated, I said, as the vintage port, but it had that tomato leaf and the tangerine peel type flavors. So that's just really, and I just like the balance of everything. I gave it 93 points. This is on the same scoring type level as sometimes I give vintage ports, so this is probably a steal. I don't know what the price is. I think the Warre's was the most expensive, 93 points. This is the house I love. The Ramos Pinto LBV 2018 unfiltered, $26. I have long been a fan of Ramos Pinto's LBVs and their tawnies, especially the 10 and 20-year-old, which is absolutely stellar. Ramos Pinto, I stayed at the property in the Douro back in 2018 or 19. Went through a bunch of different older vintages. One of the great estates in the Douro. And the cool thing is, I know some people complain about availability, but all these wines should be fairly readily available at your local shop if you have a decent bottle shop. So tell me, do you like vintage port? Do you ever drink LBVs? Do you think it's on the same level as a vintage port? I'd love to hear. Drop it in the comments below.